everybody, and welcome back to Huffoto Presents podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Huffoto Studios. My name is Brian Huff, and today I'm here with Angela Gann, author of Redbird and the Poppies.
Hello.
What's up, Angie?
Hey, Brian.
So
how
to
are
give
you?
everybody some context, me and Angie go way back. High school.
That's right.
Yeah. Graduated 92.
Where I was a gear.
Right. Yeah. So Angie Gear, for all of us that knew us back then. This is awesome because I did not know you were an author. And I guess maybe you didn't either until you just sat down one day and wrote a book.
I wrote a book almost 14 years ago, and that's what I've said about everyone who is in awe that I have gotten it published, because I say I'm no different today than I was 14 years ago when you didn't know I wrote a book.
Right. So, I mean, your process, how did you just one day have this story and think, I'm just going to write this down? Where did it come from?
I started reading a lot.
Okay.
And it was around the time of the Twilight movies and all of those. I was reading a lot of literature from my son, who was in high school at the time.
Right.
And so I started reading what some of the authors were saying. And I have always been I've always written a lot of different things. I have poems and songs and everything. But Stephanie Meyer with Twilight,
Right.
she actually had written on her author page about her process, and she always told everybody she thought anybody could get out there and do that also.
Sure.
And so it kind of started with a dream, and so I started writing something down, and I wrote the whole ending of the book first, and then everything in the front. And the very, very beginning now was actually in the editorial process that was written.
Wow. So you started at the end. It's like a Quentin Tarantino movie. You started at the end and then went backwards. That's interesting. I never thought about that because I'm a big movie buff. I love watching movies, and never thought about that a book could actually start from the end. And in that process, I guess it's just wherever you just down the story.
Well, you do, and because it was her more as an adult.
Okay.
And so it's kind of like what took her from this and bring her back, and what happened prior to her coming to where she ended up.
Okay, so Redbird in the title you described as this is actually her part of her name.
Yes, so her name is Elizabeth Redbird, and she ends up in the poppies in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is how I got the title.
Okay. And so what I'm amazed at is just your ability to sit down and put all this on paper. Did you actually just write? Did you type it? Did you write it?
I did all of it.
So you just did it all?
I did all of it. So I started out, on like little notepads, and then I got onto my on my little laptop, and then when I would be out, I was even at scout camp, Boy Scout camp once. And as a leader, as Boy Scouts, you don't have to go with them. You stay at camp and just make sure everything's full.
Right.
And I was able just to sit out there, and I just wrote it by hand. And then when I came back, I would transcribe it back into my computer, and I had it. And so the whole time that I was doing this process of writing it was when my husband actually took my two older sons out on OA camp out, which is the
Order of the Arrow.
Yeah. So that was always a dad and boys thing, and that is something I did not participate in.
Right.
And so when he went away, I sat down and I just wrote all weekend.
Okay. Wow.
I wouldn't turn on the television, and sometimes I wouldn't even turn on music or whatever. And it was always just kind time to be silent because I always had so much going on in my house.
Right. No, I'm with kids, especially with scouts, and I'm sure you guys had band and
Everything.
sports and just it's crazy raising kids. Like you have no time for anything else.
No time.
And people see you come and they run because they know you're fundraising for something. I was right there.
But that's also why I haven't been able to complete anything else. But that's also why I decided I started wanting to write again,
Hmm.
and I didn't want to until I got my first book actually published because it had been sitting in my drawer
Right.
for almost 14 years.
And that process, I'm sure, this age, that's an enigma to people. I wouldn't know where to begin to
and
get something actually published.
and so I went with Atmosphere Press, and they're a small press, and so they have a kind of like an all-in kind of deal where you pay them, but they have all of the editors and all of every single thing that you would possibly need to get a book published, down to getting your cover and everything, and your ISBN at the
Right.
back. They do all of that for you, copywriting, everything. So you just pay them a fee. You work with their people. They have wonderful people that are really great with working with you. And in the end, you get this finished product that nobody can ever take away.
Right. That's awesome. I was that's always been something that's fascinating is how to get something published because you hear about all these stories about people just constantly running into roadblocks. That's one of the biggest hurdles
Yeah.
is getting that part done. Were there any inspirations? Like, what did you find inspiration when you were writing? I guess was there anything that maybe is in the book that in your life happened? You were like, oh, this would happen to Elizabeth's character. This was
Well,
something.
I'm going to say I've always said if you read the book, um, the main character of the story always seems to take the wrong path in the very beginning of her
Hmm.
life. And so, as just as a lady, you see a lot of people taking the wrong path. And so, there's going to be tiny little parts of little things that I have just seen. Some things I've experienced, some things that I've seen other people
Right.
experience,
Right.
and
It's
so
relatable.
it
It's
is
just something we've
extremely
all gone through.
relatable.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of people tell me I could swear you were with me in my teenage years. Just random people. I've had people tell me it just makes me think about my own choices and
Wow.
what I've done. And that was the biggest thing that has struck me because I didn't think about that,
No,
you
and I
know.
I think you and I growing up, I feel like we had a very lucky childhood because we didn't have all the distractions these kids have
No.
today. We had the woods.
Yes.
I mean,
Trampolines.
trampolines. Yeah, we had danger.
That's right.
But we had our own way of communicating with. I mean, we had cell phones at one point later, but even before cell phones, the way I think everybody got together was we had the strip down on Shiloh Road. A lot of people would
Yes.
drive down there and just hang out and just be out.
And just be out. That's
Yeah,
right. Anytime, if you wanted to know what was going on, you had to be out in the middle of it.
yeah,
And we lose that now.
yeah. And I mean, I
Yeah.
know we had landline phones, but there was something different about. I feel like you just didn't give your phone number to people,
No.
and now I feel like your number is everywhere for some reason. But
It's not
back in the
only
day, it was
yeah.
private.
Well, and it's not only that, but now you get, all these text messages,
Mm,
and now they're not just, people that it's people who are trying to sell you things.
right,
And as an author, I don't know if I ever want to be on somebody's texting list.
right. I mean,
You
I
know,
that's interesting because like I got a phone call yesterday from a company in Florida, and they were like, "You may not understand what we're going to ask of you, but we see you're a photographer, and would wonder if you could take pictures of a property under construction." And I'm like, it's just photos, you know. And
That's
they're
right.
like, just please just use a cell phone. They're like, you don't have to do anything like what we see on your website here. Like it's very simple. We're just wanting to know if something's under construction or not. And I'm like, oh, that's fine. Like, you know, it's just photos. But you know, like you said, your information's out there, and
Yes,
you just don't know who's going to contact. It could be a good thing,
it could
you
be,
know.
but
At the same time, though,
as an author, as soon as my book got published,
right.
I started getting weird phone calls. So I got a phone call from this man who's supposedly in California,
Mm.
and he was like, if you pay me a fee, I've got there's this book fair in Frankfurt, Germany that we would like to send your book. So you just have to send us 3 books, and you can't ever bring it to us because you even though it's going to be in our bookstore. And but the way that he found us,
Right.
he must have Googled me, and because he found my son Jonathan's name,
Ooh.
and he called him first,
Ooh.
and then Larry, my husband,
Wow.
and then me. And
That's
so, and since then, he's still, he hasn't been bothering me in the last month or so. But for the first couple of months after it finally, it showed up on Amazon, he was just like, oh, we can, they wanted to half us just in case there was a movie deal, or it
mm,
was just very odd.
that is odd. That's strange. But I mean, like you said, you never know. And of course, today, I mean, it's with streaming services now needing constant content. It's not a
Yes.
far fetched idea at all to see your book turn into a movie or a series or something.
I have said it would make a great Lifetime movie. Not Hallmark, but
Yeah.
a
Right.
Lifetime. I always make that distinction because
Right.
it's not a happy story.
It's
It's
not
not
a
a
Christmas
Yeah,
movie.
it's not a Christmas movie. Um, I always say if a young lady, I try to give everyone, I want the reader to be 16 or above.
Right.
And that is because it does deal with things that happen to someone who is that age or above.
Right.
And I say it could be a lesson of learning on what not to do.
Sure.
A choice that you might not want to do with your own life. You can say, hey, I can see how this played out for her. Maybe that's not how I want.
And that's it's kind of life imitating art, imitating life sort of
Exactly.
situation, to where you can take something where quite obviously this is a fictional uh, story, but it has implications that and
Yes.
lessons. And I mean, once again, going back to how we grew up, I remember having the little was the Golden Book series,
Yes, yes,
that
yes.
had all the little cartoons and stuff that you would read, and there were lessons in all those. So
So I'm not
yeah,
going to say it's a grim fairy tale, but it's, but
most fairy tales are kind of grim. It
they
seems
are,
like.
they are. And so this kind of has, but it does deal with things like drug abuse
hmm
and children and and someone trying to also be who they can be in the midst of things that don't turn out the way that they were,
Right.
and so so it's also a story of overcoming.
Okay. And then I imagine a story about relationships, then, because you're talking about
It
multiple
does,
people and
yes.
stuff, and then this in today's society, I think relationships maybe they've always been as complicated as they are now, but it seems like they're more complicated to me. Mine's
It,
simple. Mine's 29 years of marriage, so that's pretty simple relationship. But
I've been with my husband since I
you
was
know,
16 years old, and we got married when I was 19.
yeah.
So,
So
yeah,
but it does seem, of course, friendships get complicated, and life is
they
a
do.
complicated mess. It really is.
Yes. And in the book, it kind of brings that out also. So you're going to see characters intertwine into the book from one place to another.
Hmm.
And but it's also about best friends. So she has a best friend in the book, and it brings out that adventure, and so that's why it's also a novel.
Okay.
And so it's literally, we're following her from the time she's very young in the very beginning of the book, and then it brings her till she's almost 30.
Wow.
And so,
Okay.
and I always say it's the twists and the turns that happen in almost anyone's life, but it kind of just brings it out, and you get to see what happens to Elizabeth.
Well, that time frame, I feel like for any of us from 15 to 30,
Yes.
I think of myself today, if I went back in time and the person I was 15 years ago would not know me today.
Yes.
I think that's a good thing.
Yes.
But, I think there's been a lot of growth. I might be wrong, but,
I agree.
But yeah, that's a very volatile time in everyone's life from 15 to 30. I feel like you're really finding out who you are, who the people around you are, or who they are not.
Yes.
So.
But I have to say, I have found more people who have supported me through this book than I could have expressed before. I've had people come out of the woodwork that have always been friendly, but have just really been just super, I guess, just happy. I said I got this published, and it was published on my birthday, on my 50th birthday. And so it's kind of a celebration. I don't know if I would have published it back when I was in my 30s, if everything would have worked out the way that it should have either. So I always said, because a lot of people are like, gosh, it's been so long, and it must have been horrible. But on the other hand, I'm like, well, I really feel like things happen for a reason when they do.
Yeah.
Sure. And so for some reason, it was just the time to put this out into the world.
Right. I mean, and you think back to 15 years ago, this publisher that it may not even exist. They didn't exist. So
no.
Just even that alone tells you things weren't quite ready.
No.
So it is funny how sometimes things, when they do happen, and you're like, man, why didn't this happen 20 years ago? And wait a minute, 20 years ago, if it would have happened, I wouldn't have been ready.
Yes.
Like, there's no way. So, this makes sense now. That, that with you being an author, myself being a photographer, I've ran into some situations where I'm like, man, I wish I could have shot this 10 years ago. And I'm like, you know what? I didn't have the skill set 10 years ago.
Yes.
If this would have come along, I would have messed it up.
Yes.
And so I'm like, okay, this makes sense now. And so, yeah.
Even some of the editing that I had done on the book, when I had been working with my editor, like I said, the very, very beginning of the book, it shows her as a child. And that whole entire little passage in the book was brand new. And so, maybe it was better to be able to mull over it again with fresh eyes after all these years also.
Right.
And to be able to come up with that in the beginning.
See, I've gone back recently because the software I edit with has gotten better than it was 12 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've gone back and re-edited some of my photographs from 12 years ago. And they're almost unrecognizable, what I'm able to tweak out. Well, I shoot my photographs in RAW. So what that is the raw data from the camera sensor, and which is just basically mathematical algorithms. So over time, the software gets better at interpreting those algorithms.
Yes.
And we get new settings and things and new ways to tweak that out. And so I can go back now because I never delete anything because I'm a hoarder, and I can retweak those things. So and like, especially at my storm photos, I revisited some of those the other day, and I was able to bring contrast and color out that the software before didn't really interpret well. And two, I didn't edit the same.
Yeah.
I'm a different person I was 10, 12 years ago. So. Like you said, with fresh eyes. So being able to go back to that book and sometimes I'll go back and look at photos and go, why didn't somebody take my camera away And I imagine you might have had some moments like that where you go back and like, why did I write this?
Well, I'll say this: when it was excruciating. I had had my mother read the book.
Oh,
There was always something about it that was just like I didn't want to offend anybody.
mm,
And when I've had people read it, they're like, "What are you offending?" And I'm like, "Well, I guess it's just because it seems so real, and that it's a very emotional book,
right,
and so things that happen could actually happen, and so being that I've always been a youth leader and and
right,
everything,
right,
I was just always so afraid to offend people. And what I've found instead is that it is more real,
right.
and so people can
No, I think
identify
people
it.
really they are kind of starved for realism
Yeah,
because the world is so fake.
it is fake.
And so, yeah. So I think when something real does come along, people actually really they appreciate it.
Yeah,
And but at the same time, I get that we're afraid of that. We're afraid of that because it's kind of you put yourself out there, and you've got to be a little thick-skinned because
and I'm not.
that.
And
No,
and
I'm
and I have
same.
always been I've always just been a, small town girl, and I just have always just, lived for taking care of my family.
Right.
And so I've traveled more with my book in a year between that and my son going into the
Mm,
military, um, and traveling to see him. I have traveled more in 1 year than I have traveled out of anywhere since I was born.
wow,
So I've been to more states in just a year.
that's amazing.
And it's been fun.
Oh yeah.
That was something that I didn't expect. I didn't expect the fun aspect of it. I was so wrapped up in just saying I just wanted it to be published, to have it on my shelf.
Right.
And then I had someone had reviewed my book, and she said at the end of the review, she said that it was so wonderful. She thinks that everyone should have it on a bookshelf or in a library
Hmm.
because it was a beautiful book, but the content in it was so wonderful. And I was blown away by that review. I was just thinking, because I didn't have any clue.
Right.
I didn't set out. I don't have a degree in publishing.
Right.
And that's also why I went with the press that I did, because for someone who's a business professional, I have all this other knowledge, but I don't know anything about the publishing world. And so on the other hand of that, it's made it a lot of fun because no one's told me how to do anything.
See, and that's where I've come with the magazine. I put out a monthly magazine now, and
Yes,
I
and
had
congratulations on that.
I'm suddenly a publisher, which I didn't realize till somebody said something the other day, and I was like, oh, I didn't think about that.
That's
And
right.
but it was just me doing something I wanted to do,
Yes.
and I've really enjoyed how it's come out, and I still feel like this idiot savant. I've just done it
And I am so
and
proud to
no
see that
clue what
too.
I'm doing. I'm just doing it and just making my
Yeah.
own work. And there's mistakes, there's flaws, there's all this stuff. But I was like, I'm okay with that because it's real. It's what we're wanting
Yes.
to do, and it's just a reflection of what we're all doing in this community. And so
Yes.
I've been okay with it uh, being imperfect. It's perfectly imperfect, and so yeah, that's I get what you get with that same thing. I talking about the fun aspect.
Yes.
One thing I didn't expect for to happen, I never thought about it, because I don't think obviously very far ahead of
That's right.
things,
I don't either.
and were people showing up at Comic Cons with the magazines and
Yes.
having people autograph them that are in
Ooh.
them, and then they
Yes.
become keepsakes. And
Yes.
people have come to me, 4 or 5 people have come to me and had me sign the covers, and I'm
Yes.
like, number one, it's going to decrease in value, but okay, I'm like, I never thought about I would be signing things. This is so weird. And
That
now I hate my signature because I'm like, I never worked on my signature. I just look terrible. It makes me feel like middle school.
well, and that's why I like that I put my name on the book as Angela Geargan.
Mm-hmm.
And so I write my name as Angela Geargan when I'm signing my book. And what I like about that is it's my distinction.
Right.
Because if I'm writing for something for my son in school, it'll be Angie Gann or Angela Gann, you
Right.
know. And but when I'm doing a book signing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it just takes you to a different frame,
Right.
you know. And I did that years ago also when I was working in business. I would go Angela. So
Mm-hmm.
I always said, if you're my friend, you know me as Angie. If you're
Yeah,
someone who doesn't,
I searched Amazon for Angie, and I'm
yeah,
like, why is she not here? I'm like, oh wait.
that's right. That's right. She's an Angela. Wait a minute. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, because most people always knew me. In fact, I had this thing when I was young. I did not want to be called Angela. I mean, it just didn't sound right to me.
Hmm.
I was always Angie or Ange, you
Hmm.
know, like, you know. And so until I'm telling you, until I was probably in my mid-30s, it was always Angie.
Yeah.
And so that's why. But like I say, when I was trying to come up with what I wanted to call myself as far as a writer goes, you know, some people are like, you can come up with a pen name. And I'm like,
That was actually my next question. Have you ever thought about, since you are worried about offending people, if you had something you really wanted to say, have you ever thought about using a ghost name and going, you know what, I'm just going to say this and
I'm going to say no.
yeah.
And the reason is because I have no problem telling people how I feel.
I think when we turned 50, that really helped with that. I've noticed myself being a little bit more unfiltered, shall we say?
when you're old enough to be a grandparent, you're like, nope, you know, because, and I think that's a rite of passage. I feel like as adults, as, you know, I say I'm midway.
Yep.
You know, I'm claiming to want to live till I'm 100. Will I live that long? There is no telling. But
No, I mean, that,
but
you never know.
I'm saying 50. I'm saying I am at my midpoint, and so whatever happens from here on out happens, and I'm going to do it with abandon, and I'm not going to worry about it.
Yep.
And I think putting my book out secured that.
Yeah, I did some recent events in my life have made that doing things without abandon a little bit more uh, prevalent. And I'm like, yeah, I've got some more things I want to do, and I've always thought about doing, but same thing. I've always been like, oh no, what people think, and now I'm at the point where, guess what? People don't think, so I'm just gonna do what I want to do, and people can be mad at me, and
they won't be,
and then, yeah, probably not, and most of the time when I've put things out there on the internet, and you just kind of cover your eyes and click, you know. It resonates with people a lot of times because you realize we're all living through the same sort of human story.
Yes.
And someone out there is going to go, hey, that speaks to me too.
Yes.
And I'm right there with you. And
I've seen more people do things here recently that have brought themselves out.
Right.
You know, different business situations, and it, because sometimes you just have to say, you know, what I want for my own life is okay.
Right.
You know, and you know, yes, you've worked and you've taken care of your families, and that is 100% what everyone needs to remember to do.
100%. And there's no regret in doing that ever.
Especially for the younger people.
Absolutely.
Don't ever forget that your family is the most important thing that you will ever do in your whole entire life.
Yep.
But living your dreams is also just as important.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a balance. It's hard to find.
We
all fail.
Balance.
It's okay.
Yes.
Just keep failing.
Yes.
Just don't quit failing.
Just don't quit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get up the next day and just know that your time may be coming ahead. You just don't see it. It's just like with me. It was sitting in my drawer it was 12 years before I got it out to get it published. And it took 1.5 years because I drug my feet. It doesn't take that long, but I just drug my feet because it was, you know.
Right. Well, I appreciate you coming out here today and doing the show with me. That was awesome.
Well, thank you, Brian. I
Great to see you
appreciate you
again.
having me. You
And
too.
everybody out there, just remember, if you fall on your face, you're still falling forward. It's still forward momentum.
That's right.
And thank you, everybody out there in podcast land, for listening. I hope you'll see us on the next one.